Hello and welcome to another episode of Name on the Trophy, the Manchester United podcast, where we're looking again at transfers in this episode, and in particular transfers from a club where they might be selling a few players this summer. I'm Dominic Booth, and I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Wiley. How's it going, Alex?
Yeah, all good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Alex has proven his commitment to the pod today by recording from a brand new destination ahead of a stag do. That's real top commitment. I've got to take my hat off to you for that.
Yeah, had to lug the microphone, webcam, lighting, everything, all the way to nearby Windsor. So, yeah, I hope you do appreciate how much I care about this podcast.
I hope the listeners appreciate it as well, to be honest. It's an interesting topic this week. We're focusing on probably the most specific topic that we've had, actually, in terms of Chelsea and basically who can pick the bones out of this squad that everyone accepts is going to be picked apart in the summer, with news reports suggesting that somewhere up to, I think, about 12, 13, possibly 15 players, according to some reports, could be leaving Chelsea as part of a big overhaul in the summer. First of all, Alex, obviously the situation at Chelsea, we did that podcast about their signings under the new owner, Todd Bowley, and the amount of money that's been spent. I think more than £500 million has been spent on new players. And that obviously leaves them in a situation with the new manager coming in the summer, expected to be Mauricio Pochettino, and it's basically a squad that's far too big and that they have to trim quite significantly.
I love that we've been able to do a whole episode just picking apart a single squad. There's no other squad in history I think you'd be able to do that with. Chelsea are such a unique case in that respect, but it's been pretty interesting to see how many players certainly I've been able to select that could be of use to United, because the thing is with this Chelsea squad, I know they've performed badly. I mean, they're what, 12th now, I think it is. It's a terrible season. There's still a lot of good players in that squad, and there will be a lot of players who are probably unhappy with how the squad's, or almost certainly unhappy with how the squad's playing, but from an individual standpoint, pretty unhappy with how much game time they're getting. So for a lot of big clubs, this Chelsea squad represents a big opportunity.
Yeah, it's maybe feels strange. Some listeners might say, well, why are you saying that United should sign players from Chelsea? You know, this comes on the back of United beating them very, very comfortably 4-1 very recently. And like you say, Chelsea's dreadful season. But it's been a season in which a lot of these players have been absent due to injury, or like you say, can't get game time. And the top of that list, and potentially one player who feasibly could be on United's list, certainly according to some transfer reports, is Mason Mount, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
I put out on Twitter the other day, actually, I thought that Mason Mount would be a really good signing for United, actually. I think that if the interest in him is genuine, which I think probably is some interest, maybe not enough to see a deal through, but I said versatile, hardworking, and he could be an elite player. I think a couple of years ago he was considered an elite player. What would you make of Mason Mount to United?
I think it makes I think it makes a lot of sense. To me, he's like a younger, harder working version of Christian Eriksen to an extent. Um, so Eriksen back in the day was a 10. Mason Mount currently is a 10 slash sort of like wide 10, but crucially can play as an 8. And I think that's where United see him. I don't see him as playing in the wide positions or in the Bruno role. I see him competing with Eriksen for that number 8 role. But yeah, they're very similar players. Like I said, Mason Mount is a bit more harder working, more willing to press from the front, because I think we spoke in the past. I don't think Eriksen does that really at all. But on the ball, they both offer ball progression, set piece threat. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And with his age, he's 24. He's still probably got his best years ahead of him. I know he's not had the best season. He's had that pelvis injury, but to me, it makes a lot of sense. I think it'd be a very good signing, smart signing.
Yeah, 55 million is the fee mentioned in some reports. Seems It does seem like quite a lot, I think, because he is only 1 year off the end of his contract at Chelsea, and it's pretty
Mm.
widely agreed and recognised that he will look for a move this summer. Maybe it's the fact that, and I think this is probably to Mount's credit, that the likes of Arsenal and Liverpool are also mentioned with an interest in him. So, these are top clubs for shopping in the top, bracket of the market, like United should be. So when people sort of sniff at Mount, and there is quite a bit of an anti-Mount feeling, especially on social media. I think people don't rate him or believe that he's not as good as he was because of this last year, the injury and the form. I think that should be discounted. I think that maybe Ten Hag recognises what Mount can do. Apparently, Ten Hag tried to sign Mount on loan at Ajax a few years ago, just when he was breaking through after his Derby loan. I think he actually went into the Chelsea first team that year and did really well under
Mm.
Lampard. So a player who, like you say, probably fits quite well into the Ten Hag mold, despite not being the most popular if he was a signing among fans.
Yeah, and you got to remember Mason Mount actually played in the Eredivisie for Vitesse
Vitesse, yeah.
on loan from Chelsea a while ago. But people in football are very fickle, unfortunately, and forget how good a player was after literally 6 months of having a bad season. Mason Mount is a very, very good player. Likely he still has his best years ahead of him. So to me, the idea of it being underwhelmed by it seems a little off. I mean, I guess he's not a glamorous name, really. He's not a superstar, but in many ways, you don't want to just sign superstars. That's what PSG do. And as we said in the previous podcast, look what's happened with them. You need to make smart signings that make sense for how the team wants to play. And to me, Mason Mount fits in for that number 8 role. He fits in terms of what Ten Hag wants off the ball, and he's probably going to get better and better. So to me, that ticks almost every box that you want. It's not always about getting the biggest names. It's about getting the best players that help you win games and win trophies. And that's the kind of signing Mason Mount is.
Yeah, you think he's got years to come at the potential top levels. It could be 7 or 8 more very
Mm.
good years, and United need to be signing someone of that age bracket for sure. But one player who's not of that age bracket, but who I've again championed a little bit as a potential United signing, Alex, is Mateo Kovacic. Me and you potentially might disagree here. We always seem to disagree when it comes to players of a certain age. You never want United to sign them, and I think, well, maybe they're worth it for a short term. And Kovacic, same as Mount, has a year left on his contract, but
Yeah.
he's just turned 29. Again, there's a lot of interest, I think, in him, and understandably so. He's one player who always catches my eye when I see him playing, the way he dominates midfield. But the fact that he is 29, is that something that should put United off potentially going in for Kovacic?
Well, I love Kovacic. I think Kovacic is so underrated. He's a fantastic footballer. Um, my issue is effectively we have Eriksen as number 8 position. Kovacic, if he was to sign, would also be vying for that number 8 position. And then you've got 2 players who are both on the wrong side of their age curves at the same time. That to me doesn't really make a huge amount of sense from a squad building perspective. As much as I love Kovacic as a footballer, and I'd love him for a couple of seasons at United, just like in isolation, in terms of squad building, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. So having someone like Mason Mount, who's 24, who can compete with Eriksen for the time being, and then as Eriksen ages into his sort of mid 30s, Mason Mount can start making the position his own. That to me makes a lot more sense. So if I had to choose between the two of them, I'd go for Mason Mount. But as I said before, I adore Kovacic. He's one of my favorite footballers. I think he's brilliant, really
Yeah,
underrated.
I'm a huge fan. He is a lot more sort of combative and possibly a bit more destructive than Mount. A different profile of number 8, and obviously we've seen United operating with those two different profiles of number 8 this season with Eriksen and Fred. But I think you make a good point with Casemiro, 31, I think, Eriksen 31, Sabitzer, if United decide to extend his deal, 29, Fernandez 28, and then Kovacic 29 as well. maybe that is a bit concerning for 2 or 3 years down the line. United's midfield's basically looking like Dad's army.
Yeah, and I think fans often don't think about that side of it, but it can very quickly become quite a big problem. Although for the first season it will look great, as you said, in a couple years' time, and it starts looking more and more like Dad's army, that is a problem because you'll have a midfield of everyone being in their 30s, and then you have to make quite significant changes in the transfer market, and that can be very expensive and can lead to a lot of upheaval. So you do need to be a couple steps ahead and have those younger players like Liverpool often do, 24, 25, who will be coming into those positions and improving over time. That's why I think Mason Mount would be a really good signing, not just because of who he is as a footballer, but that age profile is exactly what we want in an aging centre midfield.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, be interesting if either of those two do arrive on United's books in the summer. I think those are probably the two most feasible options in terms of there's been a bit of news reports around them. There's been some chatter, and they're both players who you can sort of see staying in the Premier League because of what they've done. They've got quite a wealth of experience in the Premier League, and the clubs will be keen to go for them with 1 year left on the deals. Like I said, are there any other wild cards? I've got two wild cards. The list I'm working off is a list on the Evening Standards. Nizar Kinsella, who's quite a good source on Chelsea, and he
Okay.
reported in April that there were 15 players who could leave Chelsea as part of this major overhaul. So, I mean, there's players on this list who just won't fit the bill for United. The likes of Kalidou Koulibaly, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Edouard Mendy, and Azpilicueta. I'm ruling out all of them. Zenit
Mhm.
Zakaria is included. He's going to go back to Juventus after a loan. Lukaku, I'm definitely ruling out for obvious reasons. Yeah, any wild cards for you then, Alex?
Yeah, I took a slightly different approach. So rather than thinking who's available as the starting off point, I went with, well, what do United need? What do Chelsea have in those positions? And then asking myself, do I think they're available? So, as we said before, I think United do need a new goalkeeper. I unfortunately increasingly think we're not going to get a new goalkeeper looking at the budget restraints. So, out of the goalkeepers that Chelsea have, Kepa seems to now be the number one. And Mendy, who I do like, I think is slightly too old, even for a goalkeeper, to be bringing in new, and isn't quite good enough with his feet and distribution to match what we want. I think he's better than David De Gea is, but it's not the strongest part of his game, so it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So yeah, I use that approach to come up with my list, and I've got three additional players that I think could be interesting. I'm not saying we should definitely go for these players, but I think they're worth having a conversation about.
Okay, yeah, lovely little qualifier there, just in case the stick reins in. Go on then. Hit me with some names.
Okay, so still looking at the number 8 position, but also potentially having a player who could fit in at wing back, Ruben Loftus-Cheek. So he's 27 now. He's older than you think. He has his stats have actually been superb in centre midfielder and right wing back. His saver score is 84, which is one of the best in the Chelsea squad, and would have him as one of the highest at United. He has a very such a strange profile because he's this gigantic, tall, strong player who's actually got quite nice feet and is good at dribbling and carrying the ball forward. I think he'd give United something different, and he'd also give us a player that could help out in that right wing back spot where we're still not 100% sure on Wan-Bissaka and Dallo, whilst also being able to help out as a number 8. I thought it's again, if I could choose any player in the market, it probably wouldn't be Loftus-Cheek, but within the confines of just looking at Chelsea players, I thought Loftus-Cheek is worth a conversation.
Yeah, he very, very nearly made my list actually. And then
Okay.
I looked at his age and I was stunned because in my head he's still 23.
Yeah.
Um,
He's
I
like
can't
Lingard,
believe
isn't
he's 27. Yeah, he's like he's been a young player for years, and
he?
he had a couple of loans, didn't he? And then
Hmm.
he probably should have gone after one of those loans. I think Palace and Fulham that he went on loan with. He should have probably gone somewhere else and sought sort of a fresh start.
Yeah.
I'm just looking now. His contract again is another one with a contract up in 2024, so probably will be moved on this summer. I just can't quite see him at United's level in
Hmm.
terms of a ball player. You know, I don't think he's better than Ericsson. I don't know how regularly he would start for United. If you're looking at depth in midfield, then potentially I think yeah he is an option. Whether United weigh that up against Sabitzer, that might
Hmm.
be something they consider. So I'm not that keen on Loftus Cheek. I did used to like him as a player, but
Mm.
kind of think that he has stalled a little bit, and he should have gone somewhere and sort of restarted and kick-started his career somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, he's been stuck in Chelsea purgatory for almost his entire career.
Yeah,
I think AC Milan have been
yeah.
strongly linked with bringing him in, so I think he will be going somewhere this summer.
You could get
W-
reignited by that. You know, Tammy Abraham reignited in Serie A.
Yeah,
Tomori with AC Milan as well. So
he's a
those are
player.
players now linked with the Premier League coming back, aren't they?
Yeah, he's a player I'm convinced still has something in him to give and could still have a very good season or two. Like I could see him going to AC Milan looking very good for a couple of seasons. People thinking, oh, then he'll get linked with big clubs when he's like 29. I'd like to preempt that and try and get ahead of it. But in terms of that number 8 role, you're right. As a passer, I don't think he's got anything on Ericsson or Kovacic or Mason Mount. But what he does bring is ball progression with the way that he carries the ball, which is something I guess Frankie de Jong would have given us in addition to the passing. And I think it gives us another way to progress the ball forward that we don't currently have really in any of our centre midfielders. None of them are brilliant dribblers. Probably the best is actually Scott McTominay, but he's so limited in other areas that I think he's not worth keeping. But yeah, I just thought if United were to do that and the fee wasn't too big, I wouldn't hate it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's not a bad point. I'll go on to my next. Like the player on the two players that I've got. One of them is Callum Hudson-Odoi on my wildcard
Mhm.
list,
Yeah,
and I was just reading about him to research before the pod, and I see that he's had a loan with Bayer Leverkusen that hasn't gone all that well. I think one assist in
no.
14 games in the league, and they don't look like they want to keep him at Leverkusen any longer. But still only 22, and kind of burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, and I thought this was a player that was going to have the world at his feet and was going to really go on to higher things, but hasn't done it. And I sometimes wonder why, because I think he's got the whole package. Hudson-Odoi really, he just kind of like Loftus Cheek a few years ago. He needs to leave Chelsea now, and he needs to find a solid home.
Mm,
Whether he fits in at United, I think is debatable because he's a right-footed winger. Whether he can play on the right or the left, I'm not sure. But just in
mhm.
terms of a raw talent and someone it might be worth just taking a punt on,
Yeah.
Hudson-Odoi always impresses me.
Yeah, Hudson-Odoi, about a year ago, his Sabre score was one of the highest at Chelsea, and he looked like a player who could be one of the few to be the very, very elite. Like you said, he has got literally everything you could possibly want from a winger. Excellent decision making. He's quick. He can take men on. His passing is good in the final third. But as you alluded to at the start, his time at Bayer Leverkusen has not gone well, and I was convinced he was gonna be fantastic in the Bundesliga. I thought he'd be like Jadon Sancho part two, tearing it apart, but he's not even a guaranteed starter. I've watched a few Leverkusen games and he's not been anywhere near it. And then I guess the other thing to consider is he's almost exclusively played on the left-hand side as a right-footed player cutting in, and that's almost
The last
out
thing
of all the
United
positions,
need.
yeah, out of all the positions United have, that's the one we've the most well stocked in. So I agree. I think out of all the players that could be available, Hudson-Odoi has the highest ceiling, but I just don't see how he would fit in at United. So
Yeah,
it's a difficult one. If we didn't have so many wingers there, I'd be more than happy to take a punt on him, even after his bad time at Bayer Leverkusen. But
yeah. I
I
still
just
think
think with the
someone
way
will
the
probably
squad
pick him
is,
up, and he'll probably will thrive somewhere. Potentially a
Yeah.
confidence thing at Leverkusen, the fact that he's not been playing at Chelsea, and then there's quite a bit of pressure on him to then go out and perform when he is loaned out
Mm.
at Leverkusen. That's quite a high level as well. You know, it's not
Yeah.
going into the Championship or something like that. Is yeah, there's pressure on. So my other wild card is another right winger who would fit the sort of Ten Hag mold as he's played under him before, and that's Hakim Ziyech. Again, you're not going to be happy with the age profile because he's 30, but someone who would be a sort of ready-made replacement or backup for Anthony on the right wing, cutting in on the left for a year or two on a cheap. Ziyech is a very attractive proposition in my opinion.
Funnily enough, Ziyech is also on my list, so
Yeah,
you're excused.
because you raved about him a few years ago. I seem to remember.
Yeah, during his time at Ajax, he was on our Sabre score one of the highest rated wingers in world football. And even before that, when he was at Twente and Herenveen, he's always been one of the best players in the Eredivisie. It hasn't quite worked out at Chelsea. You're right, he is old. He's 30, I think now.
Yeah,
But being a right winger who's also left-footed, who works hard, who has played under Ten Hag before, who would almost certainly be leaving Chelsea, it makes a lot of sense. And Anthony, how old's Anthony? 22, is he?
yeah. I
22?
think he might be almost 23. Yeah,
Yeah,
but still young.
I don't mind it so much if you have an older player with a younger player. As if Anthony was like an old winger, I'd be a bit more concerned. But given that Anthony's young, we've also got Ahmed there who could maybe get another loan to a Premier League side rather than coming straight into the first team. If you were to do that, then Ziyech coming in on a 2-year deal makes a lot of sense. So yeah, Ziyech's on my list despite his age.
No, he's a pragmatic option, isn't he? If, like you say,
Yeah.
Ten Hag has to make a decision on Ahmad, which talked about before in the pod. That is an interesting decision. Whether you say Ahmad, come in, compete with Anthony, you know, you're a potential first teamer, you'd be on the
Mm.
bench every week or starting if you do well, or Ahmad go and play for, like you say, someone lower down the Prem. And Ziyech, I know what Ten Hag will say to Ziyech. I know what you can offer because I've had you before, and Ziyech's probably still got a point to prove in the Premier League after what's happened at Chelsea because it was a sort of much talked about signing when they got him,
Mm.
and you know people he is a little bit of a compilations highlights real footballers when he arrived. I think remember that pass that went viral.
Yeah.
He played for Ajax, and just some of his goals cutting in on his left foot was he was very sort of YouTubey,
Mm.
and yeah, it just hasn't quite worked out. But I always like the look of him when I see him play. He just seems to lack confidence in a Chelsea shirt. He didn't lack confidence in the World Cup with Morocco, did he? He looked stunning.
No, he's a very, very talented footballer. And as soon as you mentioned highlights reel, I knew you were going to reference that pass in the Champions League because it is,
It sticks in the
uh,
mind, doesn't it?
yeah, it's about as perfect as it gets. But the thing with Ziyech, which might be worth discussing, is he likes to shoot from distance, and I think that feeds into being a highlights reel player because when that works out, it looks brilliant. But it's not the most optimal way of playing, as we've discussed before. And United
No.
already have quite a lot of players who like a speculative shot, and having another one who also likes it could be a problem.
I mean, he
Um,
hasn't scored a goal in all competitions this season. That's from limited appearances, but maybe
yeah,
sort of tells a story of how his Chelsea career has gone. He very nearly joined PSG in January if it wasn't
yes,
for a sort of a last minute cock up with the paperwork, I think.
yeah, he was, and then he got played the next week, which I thought was odd. But regardless, the way the United are built right now, you got Bruno as the creative player in the middle, and then you've got effectively two goal scoring wingers either side. You've got Rashford, who is at the moment an elite goal scoring winger, and you've got Anthony, who isn't offering a lot creatively, but is shooting a lot and trying to score goals. Ziyech, I think, would give you something different because he's not, uh, despite the fact you'll see him score the odd range goal, long range goal, sorry, he's a creative player more than a goal scorer. He's someone who likes to cut in onto his left foot from the right hand side and whip crosses in. And we don't have that right now. In fact, we don't really have any players who cross. I think, strangely enough, last time I looked, Bruno Fernandes is the player that crosses the most, which is Slightly odd given that he's the one who plays through the middle. I know he played out at wide a little bit, but it's still a bit of an odd statistical thing. So having a player like Ziyech would give you something different. And then I think if you were to have Ziyech on the right, you could have more of an out and out goal scorer who's good in the air through the middle. Someone like, I don't know, I think Victor Osimhen would do very well with someone like Ziyech crossing the ball into him because he's fantastic in the air and Ziyech can cross. So I do think Ziyech would give you something quite a lot different to what we currently have, and that's worth considering as well.
Yeah, the qualifier to all of these is that they are probably unlikely. Mount and Kovacic are the most likely, but everyone else we're talking about is kind of a speculative discussion at this stage. But it'd be interesting if United do just look at the fact that these players are available and potentially cheap, especially if big funds are going on other positions, like we've mentioned on the podcast before. Goalkeeper, striker positions, they are going to be expensive, and United need to look elsewhere. Strengthen their squad in other positions. I think Ten Hag said it after the Chelsea game. We need better players. We need to take that next step from top four finish to challenging for the Premier League. Is there anybody else on your list before we wrap up? Are you
I've
gonna
got one.
you're gonna stun us all with some ridiculous shout?
It's a little rogue, this one. I can imagine a lot of people listening will shake their heads, but I've got Kai Havertz on the list. But hear
Ooh.
me out, because there's a couple of reasons why this is very unlikely, but hear me out. Chelsea have been linked with bringing in a striker this window. Someone like Victor Osimhen, maybe someone else, I don't know. If that is to happen, then Kai Havertz will no longer be the out-and-out striker. He'll be second on the list, and his game time will reduce as a result. And as I was saying before, United have got goal-scoring wingers, and I think if they are going to bring in a striker, it needs to be someone who is comfortable dropping deep, helping out with build-up, and bringing others into play. The ideal option for that, in my opinion, would be Harry Kane, because although he does score a lot of goals, Harry Kane drops surprisingly deep and links play forward. And because he's such a fantastic finisher, he can be in locations where you wouldn't expect him to score goals, and he scores fairly consistently from those locations. I also think someone like Jonathan David at Lille would be a very good player to bring in that mold. Kai Havertz is another player like that. He works very hard off the ball. He's a presser. He drops deep. He helps with build up, but he's not an out and out goal scorer. And I know you're not a United fans are thinking, oh, well, our finishing has been bad this season. And it has, but it's been bad because in my opinion, it's more bad luck than the finishing. It's not so much bad finishes. If you look at the players that are the guilty as offenders at United, it's players like Christian Eriksen and Bruno Fernandes and Weghorst as well, but that's another thing. But players like Bruno Fernandes and Christian Eriksen have been like better than average finishers for almost their entire career and have had this one season where they've had a bit of a blip. I don't see that as continuing. I see that as just being random chance. So I don't think it's that United need better finishers per se. We just need to create more chances. And given the way we currently play, I think someone like Kai Havertz could make sense. And given that Chelsea are going to bring in a striker, I could see them being open to selling him if you got a lot of money down the table. But I did appreciate as I was writing this down, it was very, very unlikely. But I thought, why not have a conversation about it?
I think if United commit funds to Kai Havertz instead of someone like Harry Kane or Victor Osimhen, I think there'll be a collective meltdown from fans.
Twitter would go berserk.
United Twitter would not be happy. As much as I do rate Kai Havertz, he isn't a goal scorer, and I'm not sure he's even an elite player at what he does. I'm not sure he's even an elite false nine or an elite deep lying forward, however you want to call it. He's a good player. I kind of think that he's a number 10 who continually gets played in a role that's not his best because of what Chelsea need. At Bayer Leverkusen, he was a 10, right? He played a lot of his football off the front line, I think.
Yeah, I'm not
That's what he
sure.
arrived at Chelsea to do. I think was originally was to be their number 10. So I think Kai Havertz is a good player. I don't think he's an elite player. I
Mhm.
think United should not sign Kai Havertz, especially because he probably will cost 80 to 100 million at least. That's if Chelsea want to sell him, because he's not on the list of 15 potential players who will leave, according to the Evening Standard's Chelsea correspondent. So
Yeah. Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
one, not for me.
yeah, fair enough. And if I had to choose between like all the players in the world, not for me either.
If you had
But
to choose of all the players we've mentioned, all the Chelsea players we've mentioned, if you had to choose one,
Mason Mount, Mason Mount would be
yeah,
the one that I think Kovacic is the best player out of the ones we spoke about. But in terms of fitting into the squad, right age profile, um, I don't think he'll have much trouble adjusting. I think Mason Mount makes a lot of sense, even though it's not the most glamorous signing. I think these are the kind of signings that take you up a level and get you to that level that Ten Hag was speaking about, where you're actually competing for league titles and you're getting into the latter stages of Champions Leagues. It's by making these quote unquote boring signings that get you there.
was that latter stage of Champions League comment a pro Kai Havertz comment because he scored in the Champions League final winner?
It wasn't intentional. I think Kai Havertz is better than people think he is.
You're probably right. You're probably right. He probably will either play off a proper number nine, or he'll go somewhere else and,
Yeah,
and play really well.
I think part of the problem he has is he has a strange collection of attributes that make it quite difficult to fit into a team because, as you said, he's not a number nine, but he's not really fully a number 10. I don't think he is kind of like a false nine. But then, how do you build a squad around that? And if you do build a squad around that, you do literally need to build all the players around it to accommodate it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Almost like Messi at Barcelona. And then the obvious question comes up: is he worth that? And maybe not. But I do think Kai Havertz is a very good player. And when he was in Germany, he was considered one of, if not the best young players in world football.
Yeah,
It hasn't
that's
quite
true.
worked out at Chelsea, but it would not surprise me if in a couple of years' time he is one of the better footballers. And we're all saying, like, where was this Kai Havertz at Chelsea? I do think that could happen.
It hasn't worked out at Chelsea. I think has been a phrase we both used numerous times during this pod. I
Mm.
wonder, maybe for Chelsea the problem might be you.
Exactly, that's it. It's not the players, it's the management, the idea that you can sign like an army of players and it's just going to work straight off the bat is so so naive, and you're seeing it. I mean, we said it, didn't we? Like, I think we
Yeah,
said in January that I've never seen this work before, and I'll be very surprised if it does. And it didn't work. Shock.
yeah.
Like, we
We'll
knew
see
that's
if
what
it
happened.
works in the future. Maybe it'll work down the line and we'll be made to look silly. But yeah, very very interesting pod, Alex. Actually, really enjoyed this one. It was kind of good to speak in more relative and speculative terms about players and what they can offer. It'll be interesting if United follow our advice, as always, in the transfer market. They sometimes seem to follow what we say, so be interesting.
What have they followed? I can't remember them following anything.
No, that's true. Actually, did
I,
we talk? What did we not talk about Sabitzer? I don't know. Maybe I'm
uh,
claiming credit for something we don't
there've
actually
been
deserve.
players.
We
There've been
certainly didn't
players we've
suggest Weghorst.
mentioned. No, we did not. We did not suggest Veghorst. And whoever did needs taking round back and shooting in the back of their head. There's players we've mentioned who have gone on elsewhere and done quite well, but I can't think of any players that have been signed by United that we've mentioned. But we haven't been doing this long enough. We're not.
Yeah, well, after the summer, we can start taking credit for people if United sign them. We mentioned so many people that we'll probably be right at
Yeah,
some point.
yeah. Eventually, it'll stick.
But yeah, throw enough at the wall. Yeah, that's pretty much it for today's pod, though. Thanks, Alex, for joining us all the way from down south.
Mhm.
And yeah, we'll be back with another one of these episodes very soon. Sabre_sports for all your non-United content, if that tickles your fancy, as well as United content from Alex and from my account and name_ on the trophy on Instagram. And that's pretty much it, Alex. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Any listeners still listening? Trial the Player ID Pro or Fan app when you get the chance. I believe it's a week long or 2 week long free trial. It does say on the app, but yeah, check it out and let me know what you think.
That's great. Well, we're back for another episode of Name on the Trophy. very soon. We'll be back before the FA Cup final against Man City for a big preview episode. That's going to be an interesting one. So stay tuned for that and keep listening. Thanks for joining us.